frankly, at least for the generative side of music, what I am excited to see are the ways in which this can enable a new economy for musicians, because I truly believe that people that aren't even musicians will become that, just like we were talking about with the discipline thing and being able to use tools that help you do that, right?
So you can't tell me all your intellectual property and private stuff.
Well, I can yeah, right, exactly. I can tell you that we have about 10,000 songs now that we own. So that's like that we spent years building. I think probably the last time we talked, was that like 2 years ago?
I don't know I think it was in 2021, right?
Okay, then yeah, we were probably at like half that.
Yeah.
So yeah, done a lot of investment in music catalogs, doing some really cool stuff on, we've kind of hit like, and I can talk about this too, because there's really what our bread and butter is we've created this like, on the business side, I hate to use like the most overused flywheel, but really that's exactly what it is. Like we have this whole thing that when each piece spins, the whole thing moves faster. And it's like, I like geeking out on this stuff too, because the business side itself, like we really focused on supply chain. That was like a big part of and it's enabled so many other things now. So, yeah.
And what's the elevator pitch for what you guys do?
Yeah, we basically Soundstripe, we sell unlimited music to creators. So everybody from fledgling YouTube creators all the way to Fortune 100s, we have, persona-based pricing and plans for pretty much any need. So if you're trying to put music in content, whether it's a podcast or a video or some other medium we haven't even thought of yet, we license that out for use.
Nice. Can you buy unique rights to a specific thing?
We don't do basically sell the rights outright in most cases. We have done actually for some of our larger clients, we have done that a few times. So we do offer like a bespoke thing if you're a larger enterprise and you're looking for a really efficient way to get music that is branded for you and that kind of stuff. We've like in some instances, we've actually done like 24-hour turnarounds on fully produced music that's awesome. So
right. Shout out to Josh. He did a 24-hour turnaround on the intro music for the show.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I called him one day. I was like, hey, I was listening to the show. You need to do something, please. And he's like, okay, I'll put it on the calendar for next week. I was like, I need you to do it like now.
Next episode.
He's like, okay. So he goes away and comes back like that night or the next morning. And she's like, here's the first version of it. And I heard it and I was like, that's it. Done.
That is awesome.
Phenomenal. Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah, he's great with music.
I love that. That's great.
Most of the content you guys have is created by humans.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I mean, the only thing right now that is technically machine is stuff like, using samples and things like that. But we work with human artists all over the globe. So we have, we have a few different models that we work with artists, but we make it really easy. Like basically we have a set of turn-in standards when we get the music from them, but they don't have to mix or master it or whatever. We have post-production we have on staff, and it goes through this whole... We do all the admin for it. It's basically like you just create and turn it over, and we handle everything else.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
We have a lot of experience with that. So, we do our show, but we do about 20 other shows. Do you know this?
I did know. Is that a newer thing for you guys?
About 16 months ago. So I don't think we were doing it when we talked.
I don't think you were either. That's awesome.
Some of our customers asked for it, and so we started doing it.
I love that.
And we've gotten... I think if we actually looked at both of our business processes operationally, there's a lot of similarities.
Probably some overlap
because we are we're designed to take in lots of content and then polish it up and then push it back out to the world.
How much of that have you automated?
Well, we've recently started using Adobe Podcast. Oh man.
It's good?
Yeah. Oh, it's better than I called Josh and I was like, hey, can you when I found out about it a few months ago.
Yeah.
So Josh, can you take the worst episode we've ever had as far as audio quality and then give us what came out, like, because the producer worked on it forever.
Sure.
Right. And then take the raw file and throw it through the Adobe Podcast and then blind test it and show the other producers, and the Adobe Podcast one was better.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, my opinion is it was better.
Wow. Are you using for like editing? Do you use Descript or anything like that?
We use a little Descript for clips sometimes.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah.
But we don't use it for editing. I didn't know until recently they're backed by OpenAI. Did you know this?
No, like as an investor?
Yeah.
No,
OpenAI is
did
a
not know
huge,
that.
it's one of the 3 big projects that they invest in.
That is fascinating. I wonder what the angle is there. Huh.
I don't know.
I mean, they're definitely doing AI stuff at Descript, but as far as OpenAI's interests, I don't know.
I don't know what it is either.
Interesting. Yeah.
But I was playing around on OpenAI's website and they said, we invest in companies, and I looked at it and there was 3 big ones. And it just stood out to me because I know what Descript is.
Sure.
I was like, Descript?
Yeah.
Because I was like, they're just like this
random.
small little,
Right,
podcasting thing. And the producers right now were battling this concept of it's a craft
Sure.
to do the editing to where an AI is now able to do it better. And but there's still some things because it's not perfect.
Yeah, for sure.
So you can't just completely give it 100% over, but you can give 98% of it over.
Sure. Which is like most things at
Yeah.
this point. It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, we use ChatGPT. Clearly, like there's a lot of use for that. But we have team members using GitHub Copilot and like all that. There's so many. And there's even there's like a friend of mine it's kind of like a generative adversarial network, which is like a older, ML thing. I don't remember when the first of those came out, but it was one of the, bigger AI advancements over the last few decades. And when the whole concept being you've got essentially 2 models playing against each other, and a friend of mine sort of like, he's not a developer like in that space or whatever. He's a marketer, but he kind of created his own means of doing that, where he basically has like ChatGPT spit out, article headlines or copy or like ad titles or whatever it may be. He'll have it spit out a few variations of it and then pump all that into like, Facebook ad AI, right? Determine whichever one won based on engagement, and then put that right back into his next prompt in ChatGPT and say from the last set, so he has this like long running chat with ChatGPT where it's just, so he's basically using each model to play off each other, and it's like his ad performance is crushing.
Oh, I know. There's a couple out there. Usually they're fairly expensive and they're bespoke or whatnot.
Yep.
But I had a guy on probably about 5 years ago on the show, and that was his startup. What they would do is, because these models existed for a while now,
Sure,
right? They've just gotten significantly better and hit public consciousness.
Exactly, yeah.
So it would create like 100 ads, push them through the API, take the best performing ones, shut them down, and it would just cyclically do that.
Yeah.
And then it would just come back with, okay, this is what works best, and you could monitor what it was generating and contour it along the way of I want more of this, less of that. But there's so many dollars in marketing. And once you have the API to an ad platform, why would you not?
Yes, exactly.
If you have a machine that can just create thousands of variations and tell you the most effective one, just hit the button.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not there's, at least for the, as soon as the ad market became kind of like the online auction system that it is, I mean, there's really no reason to try to get quote unquote creative there, because the whole point is just to reach people with your message, right? So as long as it's on brand and within your voice ethically, like let a machine automate that,
But that's the rub. The artist
Totally.
having them back off for the efficiencies. And previously I had built some software that would make an accounting team much smaller. And so this was 15 years ago.
Sure.
We would go in, 20 people in the accounting team, we'd put this in and come down to 2.
Right.
And the people who were curious about what we were doing and wanted to learn were the ones that had jobs after.
Right.
And the people who were dismissive of it were the ones that weren't there because they didn't know how, not because no one liked them, because they just didn't know how to use the tools that now run that department.
Yes, right.
And so when I see this comment fiasco on LinkedIn and stuff of people arguing over the morality of this generative AI, while they're arguing and philosophizing, if that's a word, Philosophizing? I don't know. Make it up.
We'll go with it. It's a word now.
GPT said it's cool. Yeah,
Exactly.
Everyone else is generating and pushing the tools forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's still moving forward, whether you kind of like it or not. This is where it's at. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, there are legitimate conversations happening too around, especially in music. I mean, that's like, I had a good conversation the other day with kind of a new connection of mine that owns a company that he's in the generative space, essentially what we were talking about is like, there are definitely some interesting tools out there where like Boomi, if you've heard of Boomi, okay, or bandlab.com. There's a couple others, but they're basically tools where Boomi in particular, you can like, you just specify some parameters and click a button.
Oh, I've seen those.
And it pumps a song out, right?
Yep.
But Boomi's whole thing was when you create music, they'll just distribute it to Spotify for you too. So it's like fully automated. But then a couple weeks ago, Spotify basically determined that like 13% of the world's catalog was Boomi as of 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
So they've put out like millions of tracks on Spotify, and Spotify shut it all down.
I'd imagine.
So yeah, because it was, just basically flooding the system. And when I was talking to my new friend about this, we were where we landed is that like, there is value. Part of the value you get from things like, I love Midjourney. I use Midjourney for all sorts of stuff. We've even had some very particular situations. Like one was, my girlfriend had mentioned we have like a gallery wall in our dining room, and she was like, she had this idea for this crazy kind of, it was just like a wacky UFO meets Santa theme. That was what she wanted to do for last year's like gallery wall. And I was like, okay, cool. It was really hard to find cool artwork for that. So I just put it in Midjourney, and then all we have to do is print it out and put it on canvas or whatever, right? So, but the cool thing is like, depending on my prompt and all these other things, like I felt like I had agency over that, right? I was able to dictate what was happening. The difference between something like Boomi, and it's fascinating, if nothing else, the fact that tech has come this far. But like just clicking a button, like I don't have an emotional attachment to anything that's making, right? And so where the interesting rub I've seen that I think is legitimate is when it gets to the point of like right now, even with systems like ChatGPT or Midjourney or whatever, there is still that kind of guidance process from a human, right? But like what happens, and this is more the speculative realm, but what happens when we go further down that train to where like it has all the context of everything I do online and all my emails and XYZ, and it knows my interests and my own voice and everything else, and like I don't really have to prompt or dictate anything. It can just kind of figure out, maybe I like, for instance, like if I'm saying like, I need, oh gosh, I don't know. What's a good example? Like, trying to think of something that's more like general, but in that situation where I created that like UFO Santa art or whatever, I had really specific parameters I wanted on that. Right. But again, this is, many years down the road, maybe. But if we get to a place where, like, all I'm saying is we have a gallery wall help, and it spits out a UFO Santa thing because it uses all this probabilistic data to determine. Exactly. Yeah. Like, what happens? Like, does the world become super boring or... I don't know.
I think it stays about the same.
It probably does.
Because here's the thing. Right now, there's still the people that won't put the effort into going and doing anything, and they end up with the same target wall picture that everyone else has.
This is so true.
So there's what I have been excited about is the easier it becomes, the more you'll see a separation of people that have discipline and don't.
Love that. Man.
Because the discipline is what's going to shine. Sure. It's going to be the differentiation between most people and the exceptional people. Sure. Because I've always argued if I gave you a button that was a money button, you could press it and money would go into your account, but only like $1,000, right? You press it every time there's $1,000. eventually you'd like stop pressing it.
Right.
But right, it's kind of hard to imagine that you would stop pressing it.
Sure.
But you just be like, I don't how much time do I spend like, I spent like 10 minutes today doing it.
Yeah, right.
And then it's
right.
like you could have like infinite money, but you don't.
Right.
Right. And so it's a discipline thing.
Sure.
And I think so. I think discipline is going to shine. And I think we're going to see a huge growth in in-person events and activity.
Ooh, yeah.
Because I want to do business with you.
Right.
It's great our robots are running around negotiating. Yeah. You know, maybe your lawyer robot's suing another person. And your money robot's negotiating with your finance guy.
Right.
Like you got all your things happening. Yeah. But at the end of the day, you still have to wake up and do something.
Sure.
Well, some people are okay with waking up and like just Judge Judying it the whole day with bonbons. Right. I'm not that person. Like,
yeah, no, me either.
I have to do something.
Yes, for sure.
And so what is that something? And it'll likely be doing projects with people you enjoy spending time with in order to take the world to that next level.
Sure. Yep.
And that's what it's going to be. And so relationships and discipline and in-person activities, I think those three things are going to be hugely important over the next decade.
Yeah. No, it's a great point too, because I think that as far as like the creative sphere is concerned, there is a ton of it's a good example. Take like vinyl records, right? So like I have all the music I could ever need for 10, 15 bucks a month, period.
Yep.
I still buy vinyl records because I like the tangibility, there is whatever. And at the same time, I also like, I appreciate that, okay, so Midjourney exists. I can get anything I want through that. And again, fast forward a few years and when it can truly spit out exactly what you're thinking with whatever quality, right? I still value human art too.
Yeah.
And if anything, it has a premium on it now because a person put time and blood and sweat into this, And I think the same is true for, there's a lot of advancements happening. Did you see the Unreal Engine 5.2 demo?
No. How recent was it?
This was like a few weeks ago. It wasn't that long.
I saw the one from like a year and a half ago.
Okay, so
it was bonkers.
Okay, so this one was recent, and that's what's funny about it is it's just 5.2. It's not even a major version update, and it had the most mind-boggling. They added some like deterministic procedural generation where in the example they gave. This was cool too. They had a 3D scanned Rivian truck driving through this thing and it looked real. And they're driving it through this, kind of, like Rocky Canyon or whatever. They get to a Y fork in the canyon, right? And in front of them, the thing that is forking it is this huge, it's just like a canyon wall, there's like a Y and there's a big canyon wall, and out of the canyon wall you can see a lot of this like organic, there's like foliage, in certain spots, little rocks and like things that look like they, took place over thousands of years, branches sticking out of the walls and right. While they're playing the game, so it's like this is still runtime. The designer of the game, it's a demo, of course, but they're on stage, and the designer's like, "Hey, we changed our mind. We don't want this fork here in this canyon or whatever." So they just move it to the side, and when they do, all of the like procedural evolution redoes all of the branches and rocks and whatever, and there's even like a new little stream pops up. Because that's like a new element or whatever. And what was interesting about it though is it was things that, that's not my world. Like I'm not working in Unreal, but so I wouldn't have thought of this. But I just thought it was so cool that they had because it was deterministic, you could have an artist that's still guiding this thing, right?
Yes.
And they're moving it around, they're trying a few things, and then if they're like, I don't like where it's at now, move it back 2 slots or whatever. When you do, it looks exactly like it did then because it was deterministic. So you're basically, it's taking all of the, you can think of it like a Google Doc, right? You just Command Z and it looks like it did, but it's this super hyper complex thing. And every time they moved this, that would have been days of work for a person and it would have looked exactly the same, And what's fascinating to me about talking about the creative sphere is like, what new types of things are going to be created or come out when the time to doing so is shrank, and like how fast are things going to keep moving to where you've got, or even like going on the discipline train you were talking about, right? People that have discipline but don't have that skill set, right?
Right.
What happens when they start jumping into stuff like this?
They're doing it.
Exactly. It's
right
fascinating.
now.
And it's so, I love the empowerment that comes with that. Like,
you just opened it up to, because here's the thing. We've all had calculators. We've been doing,
Right.
we've had their stuff automated for a little bit, for
Right.
a minute. Now they're getting the creativity side automated, and they're going to have a field day with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and it's, it's for a long time, I can't remember the quote I saw, but it was basically like, we thought that creative jobs were the only ones safe from robot overlords,
Yeah.
And that all the factory jobs would go away. Turns out it is much more difficult to make a automated assembly line of something than it is to teach something what creativity looks like. You know? Anyway, it's a fascinating topic because it's still very much the Wild West, and my hot button opinion is that sort of this new, just like you said, these generative models are not new, right? They just hit, when ChatGPT came into beta a few months ago, it just flipped everything. Public sphere, it was I think it hit a new level of like, oh wow, this is much more real,
I texted the venture fund that invested in me 5 years ago, Florida Funders.
Yeah.
I was like the third investment. They've grown to be the largest VC in Florida.
Wow.
They have hundreds of investments.
Wow.
So I know the original couple people there, and
Sure.
they're very nice, and they've been working with me for years. And about a year ago, I had seen I tracked the progress of a handful of projects,
Sure.
right? And I had seen where it was going to be, and I was like, oh no, this is going to be crazy. So I texted Mark. I was like,
Oh,
Mark,
that's wild.
I go, watch out for any investments that are like with this generative text modeling and everything.
Yep.
And I gave him a couple examples of how I would implement it, or just general ideas that flew through my mind.
Sure.
And he was like, cool. And then I talked to him like a couple of weeks ago. We were on a meeting, and I said, and that came up, and I was like, Mark, remember that text? He goes, oh my gosh, I do remember the text. He goes, wow. And
I love that.
Yeah.
You needed like a gold plaque on your wall of,
I know.
I predicted ChatGPT is what it
Dude, I predicted we had to cut it from the show at the time, but I predicted the an acquisition Zoom Info was going to make.
No way.
They were in the middle of it, and he looked at me, and we had to cut it out, and it was this whole big thing.
That is.
Yeah, and then 7 months later, he made this big one of the I think he was the CTO of Zoom Info,
right?
The data company or whatever.
Yeah.
And he made this big post on LinkedIn. He said, "Joel, aka Nostradamus." I was like, well, first let me Google who Nostradamus is, and I was like, oh, that's awesome.
That is amazing. Also, Nostradamus had your beard, I think, so it's
Did he?
way too accurate. Pretty sure he did. Yeah.
Willie, Duck Dynasty guy,
Yeah.
Willie Robertson.
Yeah.
I got to meet him this last weekend.
No way.
And he's like, look at that beard.
Awesome. You've made it when he says your beard is great.
I know.
That's like I'm in the beard camp now.
I know.
Yeah.
I told him, I was like, I snuck backstage. I told everyone I was your nephew. And he looked at me seriously.
He was like, oh my. Really? What did they say?
I was like, no, bro, I paid. I paid to come back.
That is amazing. And that I the other thing in particular with when it I don't know, showed its head, ChatGPT, towards the end of last year, the technology itself is I truly believe, and this was my hot take, is that this is sort of if I had to define Web3, this is it.
Mm-hmm.
It's that, because not that I don't see value in blockchain technology or crypto in general, but I truly believe that what we're seeing right now is the next step change of the internet. How we think about search is changing actively, right?
Mm-hmm.
Clearly. How content is being generated and what content is being generated and who's generating it, robot, is changing. How we're doing our jobs, what jobs exist. That's what happened with Web 2.0 and Web 1.0. So it's just, this to me is, I don't claim to be able to predict it as well as you can, Nostradamus, but I do. I think that there's a lot of over the next few years, we're going to see just stuff that was literally in Star Trek again, just like with the iPad. And, you know, I mean, that's what we're on the train for now.
Yeah, I don't think it was anything too special predicting it. I actually am surprised that I find people are surprised when you just connect basic dots and they're like, how'd you know that? And I was like, well, first of all, I'm a customer of Zoom Info. Secondly, intent data at the time was like booming as this idea. And I suggested to him that he purchase an intent data company because I wanted him to, because I wanted it ingrained into the product.
Sure.
Because I was a customer.
Sure.
And so that's how that got started. But like for you, what I would think is going to happen for your company,
right,
is I think you would take how you prompt Midjourney and use that for music creation.
Yeah, so there is like, have you seen Music LM, which is Google's? No. Okay, so Music LM is that. It's Google's thing. They just they did a white paper for it at the beginning of the year, but about a week or two ago, they put a beta out of a UI that you can actually go and
play
prompt.
With it.
Yeah. The only thing is like the technology is amazing, no doubt, but it's surprisingly similar to generative music that has already existed, like the Boomies and the like Amper Music of the world. Like that got acquired by Shutterstock, I think 5 or 6 years ago. But and the reason I say that is because it's actually pretty dang good at certain types of like EDM, right? Mm-hmm. Which makes sense. That's already like a computer-oriented genre, right? Yeah. But I mean, if you try to do like authentic jazz or blues or whatever, I mean, what is even happening? You know, it just doesn't do it, or metal or whatever. But the concept is certainly interesting, especially, again, I know how much value I get out of something like a Midjourney or whatever. And as we're always like looking at ways, even outside of the generative sphere in terms of content creation, because, you know, generative can also mean insight derivation, right? Like pulling insights out of things too. So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening that like, and frankly, it's a matter of like prioritizing, because there's so many cool things we could or are doing, some of which I can or can't talk about. But the things that we're actively working on are like, what would our customers care about? You know,
right?
Because going back to the crypto thing, that was like probably my biggest like head scratcher with a lot of what was happening in Web3 of the last couple of years, is there were so many things happening that were a solution in search of a problem, where it was like Web3 was the hammer, so everything became a nail, right? I remember listening to a podcast where a very large game company that has their own web store online I think it was the president or someone that was talking about, they had creating a secondary market through their digital marketplace, right? And they were using blockchain because XYZ, blah, blah, blah. It was a centralized marketplace. You didn't need blockchain for that. They did it for marketing, and I understand that. But it was also like, that's a prime example of like, and then there was another company that put, this was a big one, like marquee name. I can't remember who it was, but all they did was they changed the name of one of their products. They put bit in front of the name, and their stock went up by like 20% that morning. Like, just what? They didn't do anything else. But all that stuff happens in any bubble, you know, any kind of like, so, and I'm certainly not faulting the technology for that. It's just that like the difference with what I think we're seeing with AI is like, it truly going to the customer facing thing. Like, customers didn't care about half that stuff with Web3, right? Like, the value was typically on the side of the creator or whoever's benefiting from the secondary market or whatever. In the case with AI, the value is there for everybody. Like, it has already been shown to be the case for consumers, businesses, etc. And there is so much, to your point about the like sort of flame wars that are happening online. We spent, as a society, I feel like we spend so much time pushing against the grain, or like maybe trying to like put a wall up to change. It is going to happen. We as a species just build things. That is literally, since the beginning of time, that is what we do. We're going to keep building and do it, blah, blah, blah. No matter what the legislation winds up being, it's going to, I mean, look at Uber and everything else that flipped the taxi industry on its head. Like there were
We
laws
vote with our dollars, man.
Exactly. And I'm just, frankly, at least for the generative side of music, what I am excited to see are the ways in which this can enable a new economy for musicians, because I truly believe that people that aren't even musicians will become that. Just like we were talking about with the discipline thing and being able to use tools that help you do that, right?
Like, I'm not a great musician. Like, I'm a medium musician, right? And the idea that I can then use tools to augment that without having to spend the 10 years to get there, because my problem is I can hear it in my head.
Sure.
And I'm just like, how do I make that happen?
Sure.
And so with the assistive tools, what that would do is that it empower me that I have a physical time block issue with being able to acquire those skills.
Yeah.
And now that's gone.
Yep.
Because I don't really need to. Because now I have this assistive tool that can allow me to do it.
Exactly.
It's like you arguing I'm going to walk to Las Vegas instead of taking a plane.
Right.
It's like you use whatever the modern technology is around you.
Exactly. 100%. And, I think a lot of the argument there, in particular in what I would argue is probably more of like an elitist stance, is like, oh, well, it undermines all the time people have put into their craft, right? But at the same time, like, why is that only exists because we haven't had this?
Yeah.
Like, that is literally the only reason that is the case, right? Or like, by that same token, should anyone be allowed to use a keyboard with that argument? It's using a computer to process samples that they may or may not have created, So I totally agree. I think it's honestly like there will be hurdles that have to get navigated. It's happening with every, whether it be litigation or whatever, like all that stuff, but it always winds up getting figured out. Like I don't think there has ever been a technological innovation that was a wave that changed things like this that just all of a sudden stopped because we just wanted it to.
It won't.
It won't.
You can't.
You can't.
What we experience, because, it took me a while to figure out, so I'm 35, but it took me a while to figure out like why people at each juncture in the evolution of the economy and humanity always are like freaking out about the job loss. It's like, we've been dealing with this since the beginning of time. The only variable is that it's been speeding up.
Right.
And so it's speeding, and that's definitely something to consider. If we decimate an industry overnight, that's not something we have efficiency with. Like in the 50s, it would take a long time for it to play out. So we will have to figure out, like, what do we do then?
Sure.
Yeah, but that's going to be a super, super tough problem. I did, in speaking of lawyers, I did talk with the lawyer of I think it was like David Guetta, the guy that did the Eminem thing.
It was David Guetta.
Yeah, he did the Eminem thing live.
Yep.
And his lawyer came on the show.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and we were talking to him about it. And and Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, but the takeaway from it was that it's just the Wild West right now.
Yes, 100%.
Like, there's just going to be tons of lawsuits, and then case law will happen, but it's just, he looked very happy. I imagined he was making a lot of money.
I would imagine so too.
If you're like the foremost expert in the world on dealing with this,
sure.
I mean, I'm a creator. Sure. I definitely agree that if you're going to be using Eminem's likeness, he should get some money for it.
Sure.
Because he crafted it.
Sure.
And then if somebody's going to use your likeness, you should get some money for it.
Right.
I have no idea how to price it. I have no idea how to enforce it.
Sure.
And I can tell you one thing for certain. People are going to do it either way.
Either way. Right.
It's the Napsters. It's the LimeWire. Yeah.
100%. Well, and it's also, the other thing that's tricky is that it's in this weird gray area between, so likeness is typically handled with, if I understand this right, I think trademark, right? Whereas your melodies and your compositions and stuff, that's handled with copyright. So, but where it straddles this line is like, this is sort of, because it is, I think it leans towards being a trademark thing, right? Like, because it is Eminem's likeness, but also there is they're creating new work from it, like derivative, rather than, they're not just printing his image a bunch. Yeah. It's just like you said, it's a new world. And frankly, I don't know, once case law happens, I don't know if it will ultimately wind up, changing copyright law, or if this is truly like, is this a not a medium, but a form of I don't even know what to call it, a form of replication that we don't have a name for yet. You know, like it's not, because it's not Eminem's, like we use likeness for image, name, that kind of stuff. Those are all static properties, right? But like, is your voice your likeness? Because for instance, you could probably find two people in the world at some point in history whose voice sounded the same.
Oh, there's people
that look alike or whatever.
If
right?
you have not, if you're over 30 and you have never had someone send you a Google image or something of a person that looks exactly like you, your doppelganger.
Exactly.
And you see that photo and you're like, you can tell like the slight variance, but you're like, wow, that's pretty spot on. I mean,
it's pretty crazy.
Look at the doubles you ever see in the action movies when they put the people next to each other. It's like, oh my goodness.
Exactly.
Like, they look exactly the same.
It's true. And I also don't know, and if anybody's deals with likeness law, they probably already have all this figured out. So I certainly don't know any of that. But what I do think is interesting is what happens with, because how different is it from, like if I do a cover song, right? I can find someone that sounds a lot like a singer.
Yeah.
And I'm not violating anything if I make that a cover song and then I own the recording. Yeah. Because, music copyright law is super complicated, but there's the recording and then there's the composition. So whoever wrote the composition still owns that. But if I do a cover, I own the recording. But I'm also not violating anything if it's not actually that person's voice. So is that different though than using a machine that sounds like someone's voice? This is where
and then how would what sort of tools would come about that could
determine
because they're horrible.
Right.
Your OpenAI's hit rate's 20% on detecting its own type of text.
Yes.
It's just so perfect.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
They can't even do it. So how would you differentiate between me just telling you, oh, that's my voice and my inflection, and I just tweaked the settings of the filter my voice was going through, and it just happens to sound a lot like Eminem.
Exactly.
And I just happen to be talking about topics that Eminem talks about. So it's going to be super messy as we go through it. But it's a lot of fun for me because my business is not that close to the music.
Sure.
Like you see Ed Sheeran, I don't know. That's how I say his last name. If that's not how you say his last name, I don't care.
I think it's Sheeran, but I'll let you have that one. That's okay.
Yeah. It's the fancy version. When he's in a suit, it's Ed Sheeran.
Sheeran. That's amazing. That's a new one.
Did he win his thing?
He did. He won. He did, and he deserved to win that. That case was crazy in my opinion. But look,
it was so far-fetched. I thought it was a joke when I heard about it.
Yeah. I'm like, what? Same. No, he totally won. And he even, like, after he won, they did like an interview, and he's like, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he was basically like, I can't believe we made it to court with that.
I know.
That's basically like,
if that artist was alive, this would never have happened.
No.
Who was it again?
Marvin Gaye, I think. Yeah.
It's because it's like his great-great-grandkids, nephews, cousins, or they're just doing it for money.
Absolutely.
100%.
100%. Yeah.
And I get it. And I would say that they should 100% do it if it was like a legit...
Yes, infringement.
Absolutely. This wasn't even close.
No.
That's like me saying like, G, D, E minor is like my thing.
Exactly. That Wonderwall couldn't use that chord progression because every song 30 years prior used it,
Right.
Like, yeah. So, I actually love talking about the Ed Sheeran thing in particular. I wonder what happens with, so you referenced earlier, like robot lawyer, right? Where it gets interesting is like what, I think GPT-4 is performing in the top 10% on the bar exam or something.
Yeah.
That's what they said, right? Okay. What happens though in super gray area cases where there's like determinations being made on like, how, and this is the classic morality of can a robot determine what's moral or whatever, but maybe not Ed Sheeran's because that one was again bogus, but like there was a lawsuit a few years ago with a Katy Perry song and a Christian rapper that said that she copied the beat or whatever, and through some adjustments, like if you change the pitch of the beat, basically, it sounded very similar. So they went to court over it, and I don't even remember what the outcome was, but like those determinations are still made based on a judgment, right? So do we need new laws around is there like an arbiter that decides for a robot? Do we let them make those decisions?
It's like assistive tools for the judge, maybe.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Like the attorneys will use all their tools.
Yeah.
By the way, they're crazy AI tools in law now.
Are there?
Oh,
I believe it. Yeah.
I did a law project about 10 years ago, so I still have some friends over there.
Sure.
And I've sort of followed the progression of what was there 10 years ago when we were looking at concepts and what's there now. These AI can read and understand the document, point out issues, suggest different cross-examine case
amazing.
laws. And basically the way it works is it's like a sidebar in the app. It's like this intelligence sidebar.
Okay.
It can give you can ask it questions, you can do things, you can sort of control it over there.
Wow.
And it's suggesting things to you. It's pointing out different parts of text. You can take people's in Discovery. I can just take all of your emails and push them in there and then have it go through all of your emails
30,000
to
emails
find the thing. Because that's one of the hard things for Discovery is if you get 30,000 emails, you have to have a team of these people reviewing all of them, hoping you don't miss something. Now, 30 seconds later, you can even tell it, hey, go see if there's any incriminating evidence. Why can't you talk to it like a person?
Sure.
You can.
Absolutely.
You say, go find any incriminating evidence that is inside of this. And these things are smart, dude. How much have you played with GPT-4?
A lot. I mean, I've been a paying subscriber as soon as they made Plus.
Yeah,
absolutely. I use it all the time.
Yeah, we use it. We use it constantly.
It's amazing. And if you this is the other thing, and this is now starting to happen on LinkedIn. People are pointing this out, but people have only been using it to like people haven't really taken advantage of how you can prompt these things.
Oh, I know.
It's crazy. Anyway, go ahead. What you're saying?
Well, no, I don't remember what I was saying. But to your point, every time I meet someone in public and they're typically like non-technical. I'll give you an example. So I go to church, and at my church there was like a secondary pastor, not like the main guy.
Yeah.
And he had to write this paper.
Yep.
And at the Wednesday night group, I was like, "Oh, GPT," and he's like, "Okay." And so he played with it, and then Sunday he saw me. He's like, "Dude, this is like garbage."
Right.
And I was like, "All right, well, tell me like what did you say? How did you?" He's like, "Oh, I said write me a 14-page paper on like Matthew and whatever."
Oh, okay.
And he went off, and I said, "Oh yeah, that's not how you do it."
Yeah. Exactly.
And so I started to give him some examples of don't just say write my paper.
Sure.
Like figure out, different areas and prompt it in different ways and give examples. And
even put your own past content in there to put your voice in it. Like, oh yeah.
Yes, it does really good saying act like.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
You mentioned earlier the 20% detection that they're right. You can thwart it 100% of the time if you just ask it to change its voice. It cannot work with that. Like literally, basically, if you ask it to have an empathic tone or empathetic tone, if you ask it to use your voice and give it, here's a paragraph I've written or whatever, detection is impossible. Basically, it goes away.
Yeah, I've put my own transcripts through it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, you evil Joel. Then I break my MacBook. And then I realize that it's hosted somewhere else.
Exactly.
And I feel bad. And I pick up the scraps from my MacBook. Call up Wozniak. Hey, bro, we got problems. the world's falling.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
It's super exciting. It's also, just like people not really knowing how to prompt and stuff, I think we just don't even know what all is going to come out of this.
Yeah.
Wild.
Prompting is the skill. It's going to be a hugely important skill. It's going to be the equivalent of being able to write code.
Yes,
like you're going to need to prompt.
Yeah. Well, and even basically like using GitHub Copilot, which is their like assistive thing. They have a new version coming out that has GPT-4 under the hood. Part of the example, like right now, it can only it can't determine context from you couldn't have, or at least like a year ago. I use ChatGPT for like most of my coding assistance now.
Yeah.
And because Copilot X isn't out yet. But how Copilot worked before is it would either, it would take context from the file you're working in or whatever. And maybe this is the ChatGPT plugin. I can't remember. I've tried 100 of these things. But either way, a lot of them they'll take context from the file you're working in and can make suggestions, or you can prompt it if you need some boilerplate written or whatever. But the other thing too is like most of the programming problems, or the things that take the longest typically, are stuff like debugging, like discovery with emails, right? Because there's so much review that has to happen, and trying things or whatever. Or solving really hard problems that have been solved before, but you have a particular use case, right? Example, I was playing around with writing a browser-based video editor about a year ago.
Okay. And
I wanted to do, like, you know, if you drop I don't know, like a video clip into an editor, and I wanted to do an effect where it's like stacked images, like it looks like photos being dropped on each other, right? Well, I need to like cock each photo, like rotate it, right? Yeah. Okay, well, to do a rotation handle like you would expect with an image editor, there's trigonometry involved with that. I haven't done trig in years. I haven't needed to, right?
I've never done it.
Okay, well, trig is basically what you need for that, and like these like matrix multiplication and stuff that I just don't use. I haven't any need for it. And it took me like I was spending like days having to like relearn stuff I haven't done since 10th grade, you know? And I literally in an instant, I could have had that whole slew of time given back to me, and I'm never going to use that again. Why would I need to spend all that time on that?
You don't.
Exactly. And so going again to the discovery piece and stuff like that, the more context these tools are able to handle, like, right? Like if I can pipe our entire organization's code repo into it, and it can understand how our database schema works and all these files are talking to each other, et cetera, how much more effective can our small engineering team be, right? And how much cost saving can we get out of that? How much more agile can we move compared to larger competitors and things like that? That's the stuff I'm super excited about.
Well, I'm actually curious because I started looking into this in the past couple of weeks. Like getting into moving past the idea of I can tell it within the context of a conversation and find value there, use it for sales follow-up emails by pushing stuff in there and saying, hey, how would I respond to this? All sorts of different ways of using it. And what I found is as I wanted to use it more, I needed it to have a larger understanding of the context. And then I quickly found that you're limited. So I took a transcript of a sales call, and it was fairly long. And I tried to put it in. It's like, okay, you're limited to 2,000 something tokens. Right. And then I was like, all right, well, I started talking to it and saying like, what type of systems allow you to get around this?
That's awesome.
And it started explaining to me the different types of models that you can use and the different ways. And I got all the way to the point where it's giving me like code samples,
that's awesome.
Right? Because I think that's what a lot of people want to do.
Yeah.
I want to drop my, SQL or whatever database and not SQL, Postgres. Drop my Postgres. Sorry guys. I was unclassy for a minute.
Hey, it's all good.
I gotta get that elephant action. Dropping Postgres in there, and then I just want to talk to it. And I want it to understand. It'll pick up that it's a real estate application based off like the table names, and then I also would love to throw the code in there. Do you know currently? Because again, this is actually the conversation I was having yesterday with it when I was trying to do this. Nice. So this is well timed. Do you know of any tools where I can just throw a bunch of unstructured data at it and it could hold all of it in context?
I don't know of anything, like off the top of my head, I couldn't point you to anything. But what I do know is that based on some blurbs that, like, because GitHub's Copilot X that's built on GPT-4, if I remember right, some of their marketing around that was that it would essentially, since your repo's in GitHub, right? It would be able to have context for your organization's repos, which that to me is huge. That's gangbusters. However, the problem you're talking about extends outside of coding even, because there are, like, good example, there are marketing teams who are struggling to get their entire, they may have like essentially, a spreadsheet type database thing of their brand voice, right? Like that have examples of here's how we would answer, or like on these particular subjects, here's the way we approach them. Here's, and then all there may be like Boolean type things too, like yes or no, do we cuss in our posts? Stuff like that. So, but the problem is that, like, depending on what you're prompting or what you need, right? Like maybe I need an article written and I need it to have this database of what our brand voice is, but also I want to paste in another article that I'm taking inspiration from, and like I've maxed out the limit, right? And so this just came up in a conversation that I was having with a marketer friend of mine about 2 weeks ago, where there are tools that are like sort of trying to help, and I don't know if they are, trying to essentially summarize your brand voice and pump it in from your table, or like how exactly it's getting that context into the token limit. There are things that are trying that, but there is no singular tool that I know of now outside of building your own model, because you can create a model where you have enough resources that you could dump context in and fine tune it for what you need. But there's also like, at that point, clearly it's not GPT-4, right?
Yeah.
And you're also like, when you're getting to the level of needing to fine tune it, you're back into R&D land, just doing what OpenAI is doing.
Yeah.
So there's a trade-off where, like, unless you have that kind of resources, you could make something amazing, but you could also wind up running into the same stumbling blocks that they're running into, I'm sure, as they build things,
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know of anything right now, and some listeners might have some suggestions, but I don't know of anything that takes, honestly, more than the prompts even that, because now I think I don't remember, they extended the token limit for plus users or whatever. It's like 8,000 or something now. I don't know. I know that there are other tools that do similar stuff, like Replit, if you're familiar with that. It's basically like Replit is like a cloud hosted code environment. They were like one of the earliest to that, but they have their own assistive AI coding technology. And if I remember right, they do some sort of context awareness since all your code's in the cloud, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know.
I had some success with, I took the conversation and I started breaking it up by like 5-minute chunks or 15-minute chunks or whatever. But I told it, I said, okay, I have this conversation that's larger than the token limit. So now I'm going to paste it in sequentially and so on. And I did it, and it definitely was annoying because it was trying to respond to every thing.
Yep.
But after I got it all in there, probably like 6 paste, I went back and looked at the conversations, and I intentionally formed a question where it would have to understand from more than one paste something. And it did. Yeah. And I was like, all right, well then now I'm just slowly learning the limits. I looked at the API. They said that the fine-tuning API can hold that across conversations.
Yeah. And that's essentially when you're in to my understanding, when you're in like we open a new chat, right? In ChatGPT, every back and forth is essentially you fine-tuning it for that chat. Exactly. Yeah. So, and I think that's basically what the API is replicating, is allowing you to do that And you can use that way. I don't know. What I don't know, and I've never hit this, but I don't know if there's a limit to that. Like if there's and do they specify that on the API? If there's a limit to how much you can fine-tune?
I only got as far as trying to understand the right words to even talk about this stuff. So I had an idea.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And so because of this idea that I had, I talked to my buddy and we're like, hey, let's go just kind of kick the tires and see if there's anything even here.
Right.
And so I had to take from my conversational, talking with different people, from that level to an actual, like almost practitioner level, to push it beyond what I knew how to make it do. And that was all like a lot of this week.
Yeah.
And me just exploring and trying to figure out. And it's been really helpful because, as you know, when you achieve mastery of something, you have this mental model in your head.
Right.
Right. And you need that in order to talk about it and reason about it and figure out what's possible.
Yep.
Right. So I was just working on building that model of, okay, exactly what do these models look like?
Sure.
How do you make them? Like, where do they live?
Yep.
How would you boot one up? I'm a software engineer, so I've never done much with this.
Right.
But I was like, what would that look like? How does it work exactly? And so I just asked a ton of questions and learned a whole bunch about it. But the idea that I have had before, which isn't what I was specifically looking at this week, is like, I just want to give it, like, my parents own a medical company, right? They, like, doctors, you go see them, right?
Got it.
That type of medical company. And they do like $3 to $5 million a year,
Nice.
right? So it's a small business. And and they sell all sorts of things, like 40 products from vitamins to
awesome.
the patient visit and all of that stuff. And I wanted, and they keep their stuff in QuickBooks.
Okay.
Right. And so a couple years ago, they were asking me to take a look at the P&L and the stuff because they have seen me in my interest in business,
right,
and asked me what I was thinking about it. And I quickly found out that there is so much amazing data that they have on all of these people and products and transactions.
Interesting.
That they don't use at all.
Right.
So for example, when we wanted to do reports of like, okay, well, what's the best selling product across this time frame? Or we had all of these questions, and the labor to build the reports was so significant.
Yeah, I bet.
And the cleaning up of the data, because the reports are fairly rigid and all of that. And so I said, why can't I just take this QuickBooks database and shove it into an AI model and then just talk to it?
Right.
Like, why is that not something we can do today? Why can't I, and you own a business, why can't we take our P&Ls and our business transactions and our cost and shove it into these systems and say, okay, act like, and pick our favorite business person who's written X books on the topic and use their principles and advise me, something I'd normally have to stroke a 6-figure check for.
Exactly.
Advise me on what I'm not seeing in my business or the next couple moves I should be considering. That is when I'm going to get real excited, when we get to that point.
I agree because right now there's a lot of, just like you said, there's the initial lift, like the actual getting all that stuff together, figuring out a way to where it's even analyzable by you. Like how do you even, like for instance, if you have data that's not in a structured format, like a QuickBooks database or whatever, maybe it's spread across a whole bunch of spreadsheets with different formats and whatever. Maybe it's from disparate sources, QuickBooks and a spreadsheet and whatever else, and cash and whatever, like you have all these records of all these things in different places. And honestly, the financial piece itself, like financial analysis, is that same problem. It pretty much exists in most, we have tools that like, you've got mixed panels of the world that help you actually track behavioral data and stuff, right? But analyzing that stuff is still a manual process. Building your dashboards, picking out insights and things. Like, I think about this all the time of like, why isn't there more? And there are some tools that surface some of this stuff, but like, basically, there are teams all over the world, now typically called product, right? That a large portion of their job is they spend time, just like finance spends time digging through spreadsheets, where they are having to dig through all this data to pull out the insights when like, well, why can't we just have a model surface that and then they can go do things with it?
Who's the guy? Who's the Tony from Broadcom? What's the phrase that they're doing now? Meaningful observability. They're building because they work with like Knox and socks and pants and all the stuff.
Okay.
And he said, Broadcom's huge, right?
Yep.
And their customers are huge. And they say, I think his phrase was, my customers are telling me I don't need more metrics.
Right.
Like I don't need more
more data than we
can
can possibly do with.
It's like I need to understand what's meaningful about it.
Yes, bingo.
And so now they're building these types of tools. It was actually pretty cool because I had him on like a year or two ago, and he was talking about it as so he was a practitioner, and then Broadcom brought him in as like the token customer to work with the teams and work with the customers. And he talked about it in theory about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And then he came on again a couple weeks ago. He's just over in Memphis. He's just over in Memphis.
Okay.
So he came on a couple weeks ago, and then they actually have a tool now in the wild.
Oh, cool.
And so
proprietary, and do they build it?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So they have this tool now in the wild. I don't know if it's like publicly available, but I know it's being used.
Love that.
And he came up with this phrase, meaningful observability.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. He like pioneered that stuff at like FedEx in the early 80s or 90s when they were doing all of their logistics and moving to the, the computer systems and all of that, figuring out how to handle what was he doing? What Gremlin does, site reliability engineering.
Yeah,
he's
dude.
like the godfather of SRE. Yeah.
Wow, what a champion. So logistics in general, like shipping logistics, freight, all that stuff, like to me, that's a ripe area for this kind of thing. Cause it's like, while there are always like unknowns, like at this point, I don't know if there's a single shipping or freight problem that has never happened. Like there's historical data that can be used for probabilistic purposes. So like, it seems like, and I know there's companies like Flexport and some of those others that are dealing with things like that, like shipping logistics. They do, I think all their stuff is, they deal with like harbors and ports, like ships and stuff. But it's the same deal with what we're talking about. Like logistics itself seems to be like a problem that is perfect for this kind of thing, because it's all like, up until now, we've either had like, these siloed, what I'm kind of thinking of is like last gen AI systems, right? That are narrowly focused, good at particular, like particular slices of their thing or whatever. But we're at a stage now. It's the same reason that GPT can be used for all these different things, that like the narrowness of text models has widened far enough to where like, if there's possibility for enough context, like what we're talking about, anything that is not, humans shouldn't have to do all that stuff. That should be basically, and it also shouldn't require a whole bunch of, the timeline to general artificial intelligence is a whole other conversation, but I do think it's far enough now at this point where most of these problems are just different flavors of the same thing for the models we're talking about.
I think we're there.
You think? Okay,
I think it's already happened. I have a good argument for it too.
Okay, go.
I wouldn't
Hit
just
me.
like throw that out there.
Oh, hit me. Yeah.
Very simple argument. ChatGPT is smarter than a lot of people I know.
Touche. Then it's like definition of what is GAI,
Yeah. I can talk to it.
Or agent.
Look, I talk to people and I'm not sure if they're all there,
That is so true, unfortunately. Yeah.
But yeah, I've gotten better in my age to like distance, and find the right people to
Sure.
spend time with.
Yeah.
But the idea that, we were at the hospital when my wife was in labor.
Right.
And this isn't a pretty word. It's not a nice word. The psychopath.
Oh, dang.
was like a mentally ill individual.
Yeah.
We'll edit around that.
There you go.
This mentally ill individual was there and was just, she started talking to us, and then we're like, she was going on the story, and then it's like somebody poured water on her brain, and she was just jumping around and telling all these, and you could just tell that it got super awkward, and she couldn't pick up on the awkwardness. And finally we got into the room, and we told the nurse, we're like, hey, that person, they're like, yeah, she's here sometimes, and then we do something and get her out or whatever, and she bothers people, and that's just, she's really harmless. She said you don't have to worry about the people who talk a lot that are crazy. She goes, you have to worry about the quiet people who are crazy.
Wow.
She goes, those are the people that hurt you. Usually the talkers are just running their mouth.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I take their advice. She was working the 2 a.m. shift at an emergency room.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure she's seen it all at that point. Man, it's true, because the term AI, a computer is an AI. Like we've had it for 60, 70 years, right?
Yeah.
Since the first computers. So then what is and in that case, there's the way I think about it, I guess, is like, what IQ level are we saying is general intelligence? Because to your point, we have robots that have some level of IQ now.
Yeah, well, it can pass the bar exam.
Exactly.
How many people on the planet could pass the bar exam?
Exactly.
It's not an 80% thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It just isn't.
So I wonder, and I think part of the definition, though, is that it can essentially, like ChatGPT would be able to do all of these things to turn itself into a sentient being somehow if it was truly.
Oh, okay. I thought it was just the Turing test where you couldn't tell.
No, it is. It is. But I think at least that's the rhetoric, the whole Skynet thing. What happens when it's self-aware and that, like.
Yeah, there's people that aren't self-aware.
Right. So that is also a good point. This is also a good point.
I heard people arguing in LinkedIn. Oh, it was crazy. I got like dogpiled by these 5 girl PhDs because I commented on one of the girls' PhDs, and she like had her whole crew come at me.
Holy crap.
I was like, I don't know if you're all robots or if it's real or whatever.
Right, it's all ChatGPT.
But it was at least kind of fun for me, so I screenshotted it and showed it to my wife. But they were complaining and saying something. Somebody had said, it is AI, and then they're like, it's not, it's just tokens, and they're just consuming information and figuring out what the next best thing to say is. And I'm like, ... That's like what humans do.
I mean,
that's what we do. And they're like, it's not creativity. They just take in things around them and past experiences and then use that to create something new. And I'm like,
human consciousness. Yeah.
Crickets.
Yeah.
Hello.
Right.
That's what we do every day.
Yeah. I mean, that is learning. And that is also the argument with like a lot, even the legislation that's happening around, like, there's been a couple images and stuff that have popped up that have had like morphed versions of like, like a stock image library's logo in it because it like obviously used that as training data and tried to recreate it or whatever. But I don't have to pay to go look at Google images and learn from those, or I can trace them. I can, do whatever. So is it just because it's faster that we're like having these conversations around having to charge for training data and that kind of stuff? And like, I don't have it. Like, I understand the value in that. I mean, we even have like, we for instance, like at Soundstripe, we have an API where we basically can provide music content for models that are training around that, okay. Right? But we're charging for numerous reasons, right? Like, we paid to create all this music. We also are providing a programmatic interface to it that we're supporting server infrastructure and all this other. There's a lot of white glove. There's a whole other thing, right? Yeah. But as far as like something just going to Google and learning from that as a training set, it's publicly available data. So I can go learn from that for free. Anyone that has access to the internet. So if a robot has access to the internet, it's kind of to the thing you're talking about, right? Like, yes, that is technically what it's doing, but the whole, like, how much different is that than how humans, like my example of the Google thing and where it's learning from, that's how we learn. Yeah. And it's literally the same thing. So I don't, and then, but the argument there is like to what resolution, right? Because we can learn and then apply it to other things, but that's the idea behind multimodal. Like, it will be able to do that even if it can't. So, yeah.
When it comes to the complainers, which is what I'm calling them, I had heard, I think Jim Rohn said something. He's like, happy people are happy people. Expect them to be happy people. Complainers are complainers. If you expect them not to be a complainer, you're the idiot, right? Wow. That's who they are. Right. And so to understand that these people will always exist as we make our progress forward is important. Also with the AGI, because I get to do the show and talk and I read a lot about it, I kind of try to get this feeling, this understanding of like, what are people really saying? Like when you said we're not an AGI. And I think what people are really saying is, and I'll tell you exactly why I think there's a parallel to VR. But I think what people are really saying is we're not at singularity yet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's what it is. Like, we're not there yet. We are not at the singularity point. It's not completely all-knowing, imperfect, and whatnot. And it's not bipedal walking around with human skin. Right. Like, it's not there yet. Right. We're not uploading our consciousness into the silicon yet. We're not there. But as far as if you take the word intelligent, the ability to learn, I mean, trees can learn if you block their sunlight. That's a form of intelligence. Artificial intelligence, just silicon-based intelligence, has been around, like you said, since the 60s, if not sooner. Yeah. But the parallel and one of the reasons why I think it's been so successful in culture is because the VR had been so disappointing for so long and had so many false starts. Right. Magic Leap, there's these constant like, oh, you're gonna put it on and like and everybody had this big image of what it was going to be, and then you put it on and there's just nothing but disappointment. Yeah. Right? It's just sad disappointment. And it's like, what is this? And the moment I put on Magic Leap for the first time, I was like, ooh, feel bad for those investors. glad I don't have any money in Magic Leap. Man. 5 years later.
5 years. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, so that is the opposite of what ChatGPT did. It kind of just showed up one day.
Exactly.
Publicly.
Yeah.
And there wasn't like this big reveal and like this, I don't think that there was publicly like tons of money invested into it. And it was like this big unicorn chasey thing, like, the ride services or we're like Uber or whatever.
Right.
There wasn't this big build up to it. It was just one day OpenAI was like, here you go.
Yeah.
And then it was so good.
So good.
It was so good that it didn't create the disappointment. It met or exceeded the expectation.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it was the fastest growing technology in the history of humans.
That if you've seen like the breakdown of that, like how much faster it is than
the
everything
charts,
else.
the curves.
Like Facebook and all these other.
I didn't validate it, but I saw it and I believed it.
Yeah. Just like ChatGPT does when it sees it.
It probably does a little more work than me.
Okay, so the other thing that's interesting, I'm curious your thought on this, excuse me, is the idea of like, I can't remember the term for it, but it's basically where it's like ingesting its own content, right? Okay. So, like if I go have it write a blog and then I put it online and then they keep training it on online data.
Oh, okay.
Right. One example that I saw, someone who's, I can't even remember exactly who it was. I just remember it was someone that is certainly a pro in the field. Like they've been around for 30 years doing AI stuff. And they were talking about, it's the same reason, well, one of the reasons that OpenAI has built that kind of detection model, because they're trying to weed out that stuff so that it doesn't become a race to zero. Because basically the way this was described was like, okay, if I ask, let's take Midjourney, for example. Mm-hmm. It's like if I ask it to create an image of a cat, right? It's going to...
Unfortunate. Let's go with dog.
I ask it to create an image of a dog. It's going to do just like what it's learned. It's going to try to create an image of a dog, right? And it may look exactly like the real thing, right? But it's not actually a real image of a dog, right? So to some degree, even if it's 99.99999% close to a real image, it's still some degree off, right?
Well, you mean like it's not a photo?
It's not a photo.
Because like if you draw a dog, that's
no, totally. Yeah, right. Exactly, right? But it's not a perfect like...
It's not an actual dog you can walk up to in existence and touch.
Exactly. And today's Midjourney, right? We'll just talk about today's. It's not perfect. Like there may be a finger that's slightly off or whatever, right? Okay. The issue is, and the way I heard this described was, if that image makes it back to Google, right? I post it on my site and then it gets indexed and whatever else. And then it learns from that. It has now taken that as an image of what a dog looks like. Yeah. And so the next time I go ask it for a dog, it's going to make a slightly worse option. And then eventually it's going to get to where it's 1 pixel.
Yeah, I know how this is going to end up rolling out.
Yeah.
You're going to have these like data packs. And you're going to be able to say, okay, GPT, use, it's going to have its core knowledge.
Right.
Right. And then you're going to be able to install like data packs. Like plugins,
which are just
from like
data
different
sets,
companies.
basically?
Yeah, data sets. Yeah, basically like I want the Josh, understanding of this, and I can plug that in, and I can, give it weight to some degree or whatnot.
Right.
And we're gonna go around and we're gonna essentially be picking our sources of like our knowledge banks, if you will. Yeah,
totally. But how do you? Okay, so take ChatGPT, where I don't remember how many billions of parameters it has at this point, but it's a lot. All of those data points, how do they then sort through? How do they make sure to 100% accuracy that they're not feeding its own stuff back into it, right?
Yeah, we can't.
And that's the thing, is that like, does it, by definition, it will degrade it, right? But will it degrade it to what I don't know, because I'm not in that part of the field, is does that actually degrade it any different than a blurry image of a dog that we took, right? Like, I don't know.
Here's a big asterisk. I'm so far out of my depth, but this is fun. But like, I just don't want people taking it too seriously, the things that I'm saying. But
same. Yeah. I'm not an AI engineer.
I'm far from that. Right. If you guys need some business logic or enterprise applications, what up? But
there you go.
Yeah. But yeah, I think there's a couple things to consider. The first thing to consider is that I believe it was largely trained. It's got different versions of it. So you can arguably go back, the current version is trained up to 2021.
Yeah.
There weren't a ton of generative models out there producing content that it was trained on. So you at least have sort of that and then all the models behind it that you can say with a degree of confidence that there's not a large amount of this AI generated stuff.
True.
Second, I think it would definitely reinforce it, and I definitely see the problem of like eating its own stuff. So I see that. And I think what will happen is we talk about this problem, but where it becomes important is when we're actually trying to solve something and then the dog has a finger.
Yeah.
So when we get down to that level, you can fill it up. It can think a dog has a finger or whatever.
Sure.
Great. The general consciousness of the GPT thinks the dog has a finger because it's self-referenced and mid-journeyed up and everything, right?
Yeah.
But then I'm actually needing this dog entity. So I'm going to go get my dog data pack.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From Duck Dynasty or
Makes
whatever,
sense.
right? And then
it basically fine tunes it, right?
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna have these creators that like, this is my mod. Similar to how you see it in the financial services space, where you can like eToro, you can like copy a trader.
Right.
You find the trader, you can copy them, and then you could have like your data pack, and you're known for your data pack, and then you will then license that.
That's interesting.
As the training set. I think that's the future of where we're gonna be headed.
I think that's fascinating because I mean, again, that's kind of like even with our API that we provide to companies that are training models, it's a similar thing for sure. But
we got to do a shout out. You got to go sign up for Soundstripe. What's the call to action?
Do it. Yeah. Check it out. It's soundstripe.com. Once you go to the website, we have music for literally any creative use. So if you're making videos, podcasts, whatever, we have stuff for you. So check it out.